And action. So Jordan had a question with regards to resetting your adrenals. And sometimes I think it's an easier picture if you visualize a battery. Recharging your battery overnight, especially if you're on a big hiking trip or if you have an event the next day, you want to recharge those batteries at night so that in the morning when you use the batteries, or you put them into your cassette recorder, although nobody has cassette recorders anymore, but you start draining your battery, you'll hopefully have a battery that lasts to the wee hours of the nighttime, at which point in time the battery can be turned off. Now the adrenals are glands that sit on top of the kidneys on both sides, and they're supposed to work to build up their stores for neurotransmitter or hormone considered cortisol and DHEA overnight. I like to think of it that way. If you think about recharging overnight, you have a big battery in the morning, then you can go hopefully up until dinner time, at which point in time you go to sleep and you recharge again. The problem occurs if at night, overnight, instead of recharging all night, you wake up middle of the night, or you wake up again and again because your prostate's not working, or you're having hot flashes, and your battery in the morning is a quarter charged. And if you're trying to get this gland to secrete cortisol all day long, it usually ends up stopping early, and when you stop early, you'll still be able to maintain. I think it still chugs along at the lowest possible dose of cortisol and DHEA, especially during times of fight or flight. But most people, if they're not overly stimulated by loud music, arguments, threat, fight or flight kind of stimulation, I see a lot of people turn themselves back on. I had a Chicago DJ who worked till the wee hours of the morning, or he was in the morning on the radio, but then he prepped till late at night. Then he had gigs that he had to go to at night, and he slept very little. But he had several problems, and one of the things I noticed before was if I got into this teaching mode where I would tell him about a couple of things, pathophysiology, trying to keep it not so boring, I'd see his eyes start to get closed more and more and more, heavier and heavier, until I would start or engage, or he would engage with the deep conversation and loud voice. And sometimes that will be enough to turn on or turn off that decreased adrenaline response, or the decreased cortisol that's supposed to come from the adrenals. So we can always outrun that with temporarily recharging the battery with something fast, but it never holds that battery like it should. And that would be with coffee, with Red Bull, with sometimes ADD medicine. So whatever you do to recharge that little battery during the day to make it till evening, well, number one, those efforts that we do to recharge the battery, even though temporary, they might last and affect you into sleep when you're supposed to have everything turned off. So that's one downside of getting those temporary hits in the morning, in the afternoon when you crash. The other thing is you want to really work to have a good sleep cycle so you can have a really recharged adrenal. And if the adrenal is working properly, it can dump all the cortisol out in the morning. And you've probably heard how elevated cortisols are bad because they make you have, they're associated with centripetal obesity or fat in the tummy. Well, it's true, but usually because you're being called on because of stress, or the adrenals are being called on to answer fight or flight. And or they've been too tired that you have to super stimulate them during the day. And that's not healthy either, because you have this massive spike of cortisol and DHEA, which is not healthy, but it gets you through. So again, if you want to have more efficient wake-sleep cycles, it takes a little bit of time. I've done videos on DrRic tutorial cortisol, and I explained those things, or DrRic tutorial reset your clock, to explain how to get things back to normal, back in sync. Even if it's been a long time, it still would be helpful to try to knock that rhythm back into sync. Sometimes it means, as I mentioned in my cortisol video, have to give hydrocortisone, and that's not a bad thing. I've actually used hydrocortisone in the daytime to a good response, or naltrexone at night to also a good response, but usually that's with other medical problems on top. Sometimes, as I've mentioned in my videos, there are things that you can do at night to induce sleep. This is valerian, passion flower, hops. Helps nicely. This is Now Foods brand, found at Fruitful Yield. And then during the day, if there's a stressful morning, I sometimes go with ashwagandha. This is Whole Foods brand ashwagandha, a great herb that's it's an adaptogen that calms the brain. I can feel this kicking in as I'm driving into work. It just settles me. In addition to listening to nice music on the radio and having a breath exercise. And if you're totally fatigued and can't use the ashwagandha, sometimes knocking the wakefulness into play with rhodiola or D-ribose, 5 grams, or B12 in the morning, sometimes will also get you excited or awoken. But again, this is going to be temporary. The stronger you use medicines, the more side effects those medicines will have. Coffee is fine, but coffee will cause reflux, so you might have to be careful about the side effects of reflux, and I think it's somewhat addictive, behaviorally, just because it's such a nice stimulant. But look how many people are on Prilosec, omeprazole, Protonix, Pepcid, Zantac. I think there's too many people on that, and it's because we have reflux, so you're not supposed to be taking caffeine or coffee bean with reflux. So the other thing to always keep in mind is you got to keep away from your cell phones. This is an empty cell phone because I'm filming with it. But your cell phones at night will give you a brain that stimulation that's supposed to be daytime, not nighttime. I'd rather have you pick up a good paperback magazine or magazine and read. It's very tempting for me to check out the weather the next day or figure out what I'm going to do with looking into an article, researching on consumer labs on my tablet, but I have to stay away from that because even if I can get to sleep because I'm super tired, my brain won't be rested and I won't wake up refreshed. So those of you who think you get to sleep, you can get on your tablet or turn off the TV and you can immediately doze off. That exhaustion that you have is not the same thing as restful brain waves. Restful sleep is usually rewarded in the morning by wide awake in the morning, no coffee necessary, ready to go, problem solving, you're good. Bad sleep, snoring that's uncontrolled, apnea if it's there, a partner that's kicking you, a dog that's trying to wake up and go for a walk 3 in the morning, all those things will interfere and you might be dead tired physically so that it's shut-eye, but if your brain doesn't go into those stages of sleep, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, 4 REM, and then back up again at least 6 to 7 times, you won't feel refreshed. So it has to be rewarding sleep. And when it's rewarding sleep, battery gets charged, adrenals get full, and then you have a high cortisol in the morning, low cortisol in the evening, and you're good to go. Blood tests, I've been getting dinged left and right by patients, insurance companies saying, why did we get this cortisol level? Why are we getting DHEA? Believe it or not, insurance companies are saying it's not medically necessary. And how is that when I have a patient I'm actually improving? It's too hard. It takes way too much time from my staff to argue that I wanted this test. So I'm going to have to pull back on some of the tests I'm getting and just wing it. And I think it can be done, but you'll not be getting a snapshot beforehand and a snapshot after. We just have to go with symptom improvement. And I can do that. A lot of my patients will have symptom improvement. But for me to empower a patient, it's nice, if you're my patient, it's nice when you see a number and then you repeat the number and it's improved. Or even a sleep study, you see that it's improved. Or even a scale, a weight. It's nice to see when you have a snapshot before and snapshot after. But in the case of adrenal fatigue, might not be able to get these cortisols too much longer, especially with the new administration and the restrictions on insurance or these very high copays. But there's always a way. I like DrRic. I think they have a very good saliva test. You can check 4 levels of cortisol via saliva. You spit into a pipelle or a little plastic container. You put it in the box, you send it off, and I think for $80 to $100 something, you can have a salivary cortisol test, which there's been some information. I'm not sure how reliable it is, but blood tests to me are always the most important. If you can't afford the blood, which I'm going to have to tell my patients to get now, just get the saliva test. You don't need a prescription for that. And the cool thing is you can also test for testosterone and a couple other things, female hormones, which leads me to my last point. The adrenals, which sit on top of the kidneys, they also work in conjunction with the thyroid, which works in conjunction with your gonads, female it would be ovaries, or males would be testicles. And all of that works under the guidance of the hypothalamus and the pituitary. So all these organ systems all depend on a circadian rhythm. So if something's off here, in the adrenals or in the gonads, I can certainly address the one organ system at a time, but we cannot forget the others. Eventually, once we get things, at least on paper, improved, if you're not 100%, you might have to go to the next gland.